So Jeff, I got to ask you a question.
Go for it.
You're a musician,
Guilty.
a professional musician.
I'm trying. Yeah.
You play violin.
I do play the violin.
So you know what real music sounds like.
At least from under my ear, yeah.
I don't know if that works. Yeah, you're used to hearing violins like 3 inches from your ear.
Yeah, it can be pretty loud. But,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's kind of why I kind of got into this, the audiophile business, is because I'm trying to like recreate what it actually sounds like and things that I couldn't have heard in person, like, or people that are no longer with us, like Hi-Fits or somebody like that, and trying to really learn from how they made music and their sounds. And
So when did you get your first hi-fi?
well, that was
Oh wait,
my,
I didn't
yeah,
ask you this.
sure.
The leading question, I
Sure.
totally screwed up. Because we were talking long before we started shooting. Are you an audiophile?
Absolutely, proudly.
Okay, good, good. See, everybody hems and haws. They can't just
No.
say it. You just come right out and say it there.
Yeah,
Good,
absolutely.
thank you. So when did you get your first system?
Well, for my graduation present, my dad bought me a pair of Sennheiser HD 650s and a little tube amplifier. It was called like an Earmax Pro or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that was my graduation present. So that was my first little setup that I had in college. And then I got pretty heavily into headphones because that's all I had room for. Though I will say, I had one dorm room at it's a small music conservatory in Los Angeles called the Colburn School, and all the students live in the same dormitory. And you change rooms every year. You'd request certain rooms because they had a little more space. So, but anyway, so we got the room that I wanted, and at a Goodwill in Los Angeles, I found a pair of Magnepan SMGBs. I think they were like $40 or $50 or something like that. And they didn't have stands, and one of the socks was like really discolored, but they worked. So that was my first like real set of speakers that I owned. I mean, they needed a little TLC. I had, at one point there was a bass rattle, so I had to, take the sock off and glue it back to the Mylar, but that was kind of fun, and ordered a new sock, so they looked really nice by the time I left. I ended up selling them to my roommate. I'm wondering if he still has them. I hope he does. And then I moved to New York, and I bought a pair of MMGs. The SMGBs like got me like hooked on like the Magnepan thing, and I bought a pair of MMGs off Craigslist, and then it's kind of spiraled out of control. the electronic side of it.
Yeah. Wow. I feel right at home. A lot of this stuff is my stuff.
Yeah. System built by Steve. No. Yeah. I mean, definitely an influence of the audiophiliac for sure.
Oh, very powerful. So the turntable is a VPI classic, right?
Yeah, I think it was the first classic with a Kleos cartridge by Lyra. The XA25. This was kind of the first piece of electronics that like really opened up the floodgates. I had Vidar, however you say
Vidar,
it.
Yeah.
And that was with the LRS, and that sounded good. But then I forget whose review it was of the LRS. They said the XA25 was like when it really came alive, and so I bought that. And I also bought it because it was and you mentioned this, a lot of other speakers work really well with it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to also leave that door open to experiment with other speakers. But I put that in the system, and my other roommate came out and he goes, "What happened? Like, it sounds like amazing. Like, what happened?" And I was like, "Oh, I just changed the amplifier." And that's really, and then I'm like, well, if that made that much of a difference, I gotta get the matching preamp. Yeah, I gotta get the matching preamp and all that other stuff. So. And
the DAC is a Terminator.
Yep, that's the
Denafrips.
The original Terminator. Yeah, that was also, I've had that maybe a year and a half or so. That was also, in Colburn I had a shit Bifrost, and then a Riga DAC, which I really liked that DAC. It was more of that like analog sound. Yeah. And then I had a Mytek Brooklyn, and then a Chord Cutest. and then this has been, I really like this. It's going back to the, does it sound more like analog? It's sounding pretty close to analog sometimes.
Go. Wow.
But yeah, and I've also gotten I have an original Bluesound Node 2, not a 2i.
Oh man,
they're rare.
Those are the good ones.
They're very rare. No. But the streaming is really incredible. And I mean, it opens up. That's one thing that I can kind of go down the rabbit hole. It's like going down the rabbit hole on YouTube, which I'm sure some of you will do after you watch this. But I find myself, checking the clock and it's after midnight, gotta go to bed. But yeah, it's amazing the stuff that you discover on streaming.
It is amazing. I'm buying more vinyl now than I have a really long time. When I switched to this Techniques turntable, it just changed something in me, and I'm in this massive vinyl mode.
Yeah, you've got my dad thinking that he wants to trade in his bassist turntable for a Techniques. Well, because of the cartridge thing. He's never been able to do that.
Well, he doesn't have to change. He could just get a different arm on his bassist, right? He doesn't need to get it.
I mean,
but changing cartridges is so much fun.
Yeah, and he's kicking himself because he had a Techniques turntable back in the 80s.
Yeah.
No. Maybe it's time.
You could have both for a while.
Yeah, that's true. Don't tell my mother. But.
No, we should just blame me. Everybody does. And we didn't talk about your phono preamp.
Oh yes,
on top of the Terminator, and that's.
I know. We'll move that later.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a Gold Note PH10, and then behind the REL, I've got the separate power supply, which I would highly recommend if anybody has this, because I was telling Steve I don't think they should sell it without the power supply. It makes that much of a difference.
Right. So it's like sold with a wall wart?
Yeah. I think the PH10 has a built-in power supply. But then you can bypass that by having a separate one. But.
And the REL. Right.
And the REL, that's kind of. I have been struggling with placement and trying to get them to integrate with the LRS, but I also have a pair of LS50 Metas in the other room, which that seems that they love one another, and especially when I have people over for movies, that's the system that gets used. Yeah.
And the J's Audio CDT2.
Yep, I'm behind on the not the Mark III. So
good time. Wait for the Mark IV. And that's it. Yeah. Well, it's a great system.
No, thank you. It's I say, it's your fault. But.
Well, blame me. Yeah. So you started with violin?
Yeah, I started playing the violin at the age of 5.
Wow.
Haven't quit yet.
You still trying to get it right?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get it right. I mean, I think that's also a connection between music and audio, is that we're always trying to make things better, and so I'm still trying to get better at the violin, and still trying to make this thing sound better too. So. Your
father's an audiophile?
Yes.
So at age 5, were you also hearing a really nice system?
I probably couldn't tell you exactly what was in the system, but I grew up, my dad, both my parents were instrumental teachers in Columbus City schools, and my dad was very much an audiophile, and I remember when I was a kid, they'd even have like a day of the week. There were a couple audiophiles that would come over, and they would bring some records over, and they would trade records for the week just to listen on each other's systems, and I would get to listen for those sessions sometimes if I was good. But yeah, it's always been a part of my upbringing, and I've always had music around me. So
I like that idea that you were learning to play and also learning to listen in an audiophile way at such a young age.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that listening through a great system definitely helped me get a sense of what a good sound should be on the violin. And there was one of my very first teacher, her husband, once told my parents, "Oh, he's got a good sound on the violin because his dad's got a nice stereo." So,
really?
I don't know if that's actually true, but yeah, I do think there is so much to learn from listening to a great system as a musician. I think I'm happy with whatever I have, I guess. But I think vinyl sounds a little bit better. I think for me, it's like the texture of the sound that is more lifelike. For me, sometimes digital, and it's in the worst sense of it, but like sometimes as far as violin is concerned, it feels like glossy. But when you hear a violin in real life, there's lots of texture to it that I feel like is more easily accessible on vinyl or analog. Yeah, it's something the presence of it and the texture of it. It's so hard for me to put it into words, but that's more lifelike to me than. I mean, digital has come a long way, and I think that in another 10 years, who knows if I'll have the same answer. But I do feel like listening to a violin on record, that's closer, in the best recordings that I've heard, that's closer to what it actually sounds like than a great digital recording.
Because the old thing that audiophiles say is that digital is so good, it sounds like analog. But no one ever says the opposite. No one ever says, analog is so digital, analog is so good, it sounds like digital. No, it doesn't go that way. It only goes in the other direction.
Only when you get a really quiet record, you're like, wow, that's almost as quiet as a CD.
So your father's still around and he's still an audiophile?
He's still an audiophile, yeah. And so, I mean, I grew up with that's a great luxury to get to listen to a nice stereo. But so over the pandemic, we were talking earlier about this, but I went home for a few months when the city shut down, and I brought some of my stereo home. At that point, I brought the Passlabs XA25 and the LRS home. And at that time, my dad had their dynamic speaker, but they had a ribbon tweeter. They're NOLA Metrogrands.
Okay.
And we hooked the little LRS up, and he was pretty blown away by him. And now he's went from 1.7 eyes to 3.7 eyes, so he's on the Magnepan train now. So.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm jealous of his bigger Magnepans. But
So, but you like listen to other types of music other than classical?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would say that when I was like collecting CDs and I first got into my own stuff, it was like strictly classical. But now, I think some of like the best sounding acoustic recordings are jazz albums. So I've gotten relatively heavily into that. But yeah, I'll listen to anything that sounds good. That's
That's good.
Yeah, and that I find, musically interesting, which is there's an endless supply of it. So
yeah, and it's amazing through a lifetime of how that changes. You go back to things you liked when you were 18 or something, and some of it's still great, and still grabs you, and some is like,
on that point though, I feel like the older that I get, the stuff that I still love and keep listening to, like. The older you get, for me, I understand why I like a performance and like what musically is more successful, and it just gives you a greater appreciation of that performance or that piece or that recording.
But Jeff, I want to hear about your music for
Sure.
the recordings that you've made. So where can people hear that?
I think most of our, if not all of our CDs are on Spotify, and they're definitely all on Tidal. So I'm the violinist in the Calidore String Quartet, Calidore, Calidore String Quartet. Yeah, and we've, 4 or 5 recordings out there, and our most recent is on Signum Records. It's called Babel, and there's a piece by Caroline Shaw, who's a Pulitzer-winning composer, and a piece that she wrote for us. And we're now in the midst of the Mount Everest of string quartet cycles. Your Legacy as a string quartet, recording the Beethoven String Quartet cycle. And that's being recorded in Atmos and will be released. I think the late quartets will be released in early 2023. So Coming up.
So, here's a question about
Sure.
making these records, though.
Mm-hmm.
You work with a producer, right?
Producer, yes.
And your producer isn't just there to make sure you get all the right notes.
Yeah,
What are they doing?
They're there to make sure that it sounds like a performance and that it's honoring what's in the score and everything. It's a very important job. And then we've worked with producers that are very hands-on and ones that kind of want us to run the show. But I think the best producers really make it sound like a performance. Because oftentimes you can get really caught up in making everything sound perfect, and you're just focusing on, one note there, but rather than it really having that cohesive, style of a performance.
But you play the movement, and then she'll say, okay, now on.
Yeah, well, so we're working with Judith Sherman for this Beethoven cycle, and what we'll do is we'll play the movement, and then she has us come back and listen, and so we can hear what she's hearing and what's happening with the performance, and then we don't listen anymore. Then we go back in there, and then she's really guiding us through the rest of that process and making sure, and we trust her fully that if she says we have something, we have something. And then she also has to make sure that, cohesively, that all the puzzle pieces fit. So that's, it's definitely, she's as much a part of the performance as we are.
Right. So Jeff, I want to hear about, because of, I always feel like I'm at a disadvantage because I'm not a musician. I have no sense of time or anything.
You got to give yourself more credit.
Piano tuner. That in terms of evaluating music, I'm always interested about what musicians, the recordings that you like.
Sure.
Why you like them for music and also for, in this case, for sound quality. Mm-hmm. So you've picked some of your favorites.
It's hard to pick only these. I brought the whole collection out, but so this is. On RCA, it's a performance of I didn't even know this existed, but of Schubert Fantasy, which is one of the most difficult pieces for both violin and piano. And it's really well recorded. For the purists out there that are looking for the most authentic Schubert Fantasy, he does make a little bit of a cut at the end of the Schubert, but I still let that slide. But the performance is really, it's really breathtaking and really captures his violin sound really well. And then I guess, so I'm going to have Heifetz is often considered the best violinist of, at least of the 20th century, but some people think of all time. But this is also from a similar era with the same pianist doing Kreutzer Sonata.
Can you hold it higher?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Kreutzer Sonata, also on RCA. All of the Heifetz stuff is on RCA. And then this is, I got, over the pandemic, I've as a lot of people I bought a lot of records, and this is a 45 of a classic records reissue of the Sibelius Concerto with Walter Handel and the Chicago Symphony. And these Chicago recordings, you really get to hear the sound of the hall. Mm-hmm. And the perspective of the violin in the orchestra, I think, is really well done. Uh-huh. So it's like that's what I think, like when the system's sounding really great and I find a really great recording, it's kind of like riding in a time machine. So that's like that's the time machine. And this, it's a very good, as far as the audio is concerned, it's a very good recording. But Heinrich Schering, because the Brahms Concerto is one of the staples of the violin repertoire, and this is my favorite performance of his. He also recorded it many times, but this is my favorite performance of his with Pierre Monture and the London Symphony on RCA. We'll go to Milstein, another great violinist. A lot of his recordings sound really great on Capitol. This is Prokofiev Sonata, which was originally a flute sonata that Prokofiev himself transcribed for violin, a Handel Sonata, and Vitaly Chaconne. But that's another, like the sound of the violin, it's very closely mic'd, so you hear all of the great, he plays an amazing Stradivarius that actually the concertmaster of the LA Phil now plays, so I've heard that violin in person, and now that's really well captured on that recording. Then this, I have to have a string quartet record in there, but this is a really great sounding record. I don't think it's terribly expensive, but I know Bartók might not be everybody's cup of tea, but this is a really fantastic recording, and the Juilliards were known for their interpretation of Bartók, and it's hard to get to capture the sound of a string quartet, and this is, I think, done really well, and the performances are really first rate. And then this is one of my favorites of all time. Again, the classic Records 45 reissue of Heifetz, Brooks Scottish Fantasy, and Vietton 5. But the Brooks Scottish Fantasy it's kind of legendary, that recording, and just to hear it in that sound is really spectacular. He was the best, so you get to hear it. And then just some other stuff. It's hard to just pull a few things, but this is a really great sounding recording of Nat King Cole, Love Is the Thing, Dire Straits, Telegraph Road from this is Love Over Gold. Especially the soundstage of Telegraph Road at the beginning with like the thunderstorm and everything. That's so cool. So yeah, I'm branching. I was very heavily into classical music, so I'm slowly branching out here. But this is, I mean, it's not the absolute best sounding recording, but the music on this, I just love. Bird in Flight, Donald Byrd. Yeah, I never get tired of this record. I just put it on and puts a smile on my face. And then the Carnegie Hall recordings, Harry Belafonte at Carnegie Hall. Incredible. If you've ever been to Carnegie Hall, talking about a time machine, like you're just right there.
And if you've never been to Carnegie Hall, you'll feel like you were there.
Exactly. Yeah, and then this is my prized possession, classic record reissue on 45 of the Weavers from 1963. I love this record. That's like probably my favorite thing that I've ever listened to. But you really feel like you're there on stage performing with the Weavers.
I mean, it's amazing. What I like about that is the perspective of the stage and the audience.
Yes.
They're in the right proportion.
Yeah, because there's a lot of call and response, and you get to hear that really well.
You hear the room.
And the applause is, that's a weird thing to comment on, but the applause sounds real too.
You are an audiophile.
I've got the disease. But,
Wow. You have extra cred. So you know the real thing.
I wish I was there for that concert. But,
Anyway. Well, this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for coming up.
Jeff, this was a high point in my the Audiophiliac show history.
No. Well, it's an honor to finally get to meet you after having coffee and watching your show in the mornings. To actually have you here, it's pretty surreal. I don't know if you got that, but like for me, like this whole YouTube thing is new. Like consuming YouTube content is new, but I really felt like I knew you even though I'd never met you.
Wow.
And then like to actually have you here, it's very, very surreal. Thanks for coming.
That's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you. What a great way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.